first parallel session of conference. We are very blessed to be joined with Ustaz Osman. He was born in West Los Angeles and he graduated from UCI in 2005 with a degree in electrical engineering. This was in 2005, and then he worked as an electrical engineer for a while before moving to Cairo to attend at Azhar University. He then returned to California to UCI to pursue a doctorate in education psychology. So please give your full respect and undivided attention to Ustaz Osman, who will talk about bettering the Ummah through purifying oneself.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah wa ala alihi, sahbihi, wa man wala. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah to bless us and to accept from us and to guide us to that which is best. Ameen. Jazakumullah khair for joining us today for this session. So this is called Inside Out, and some of you might be wondering what that means. And the purpose of this session was to actually speak about kind of how Islam focuses a lot on the individual, right? On purifying ourselves internally is fundamental to Islam, but there's actually something greater, and that is actual communal success. So while we work as individuals to purify ourselves, this is not the objective of Islam, just to make individuals pure and to make them good people, but it's actually to transform societies into being righteous institutions and righteous places that succeed collectively. So our talk will focus on kind of what is this bridge between individual success and communal success. So just to begin, one of the hallmarks of Islam that always strikes me as unique to this beautiful faith of ours is that Islam is a social religion. It is a public religion. It is social at its very core. So you're wondering, what does that mean? That so many think religion is usually perceived as something very personal, right? Especially in Western society, in secular society. People say, well, look, religion is something that's, it's a voluntary choice for the individual, and he or she can do that in the confines of their own home, or they can do it in their own centers, right? And it's not really something which they think permeates beyond that. But if you take Islam, every single act that we perform, almost without exception, despite the fact it might be very individual in one component of it, it is actually almost always encouraged to be done collectively. Let's take your salah. Salah is something which you do as an individual, right? You pray, you're focused, you're trying to build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're trying to connect with your creator, yet Allah tells us to do it in congregation, all the time. 5 times a day, the recommendation is in congregation. Eid, congregation. Janazah, congregation. Rain prayer, congregation. So no matter what the circumstance is for salah, Allah says it's individuals who do it, but they do it together. If you take Hajj, the commemoration of the sacrifice of Ibrahim and his family, something which we do as an ummah, collectively. Right? If you take even something like zakat, right? What you're supposed to do is give money to people who need it because you're trying to build that connection. So what all this is getting at is that this religion of ours does not exist for the sake of the individual alone. And that's why I think that Islam is something which is very controversial in many societies, especially to the West, because it is something which threatens the societal behavior and the implementation of it. So, if Islam is a public religion, if Islam is a communal religion, then it's a movement inherently. And I think this notion of the Islamic movement is not as popular today as it used to be. But the notion is supposed to be that we can't succeed as individuals. In fact, you cannot, even in your own professional life. If someone here wants to become a doctor, they don't become a doctor just by their own efforts. They need to have some sort of other people they work with, they need to have mentors, they need to have other students, they need to have connections, and as a group of people, you're able to get to your goal. And so that's what we mean by thinking the inside out, that it needs individual efforts and success, but more than that, it actually needs collective work too. And so if you even think about any movement in the history of humanity, if you take, whether it be the civil rights movements, whether it be Islamic movements, right, all of them were successful under this notion that different people have to come together with different talents, and they collectively can lead to a greater success. And this is exactly what you find in Islamic history, and I want to speak about today. Because I think a lot of the challenges that we face, whether it be in our masajids, whether it be in larger Islamic organizations, is this conflict between individuals trying to come together and trying to work for this greater good. So the first thing I wanted to speak about today was actually the nature of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as somebody who valued this social way of dealing with faith. So one of the very first things that he did when he went to the city of Medina, recognizing that, look, we are dealing with people, actually any time in history, people are usually in conflict with one another, that we've got to bring people's hearts together. Because we cannot work together if our hearts are not united. And so the first thing that he did is he took the people from Mecca who had migrated, the Muhajirun, and he took the Ansar, and said, you know what, we're going to buddy you guys up together. We need to eliminate any sort of feelings of not individuality, but of that I'm from one group and you're from another group. Yes, we can have our individual differences, but really, we got to come together, because there's something greater than us that's at stake. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he did this through enacting the brotherhood. But he also did it through his own, from the inside out. So as an individual, before he could get to a level of working with others, he had to prove to others that he was worthy of working with. So one of the most important things that an individual needs to succeed at a global level or to succeed at a communal level is that people see that person as trustworthy. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not looked at somebody as someone, right, who was distrustful in any way. They knew they could trust their secrets with him. They could trust them with their possessions, right? That he was a man of his word. He practiced what he preached. And so all these things began to set those wheels in motion that, you know what, we can work with this individual. We can work with this person, because all the other Arabian tribes around, they're watching. They're saying, who is this man? What does he do? And let's make sure that we want to work with him. So even when there were hypocrites who were undermining the entire Muslim Ummah, and the Sahaba actually wanted to execute those individuals because they were backstabbing the Ummah. They were traitors. What did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ say? He said, just chill out. He goes, I don't want people to start saying that Muhammad kills his companions. Because once you start to have that internal discord, everything would begin to fall apart. And you cannot have the type of success that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were after. So there's a couple of principles that I wanted to speak about today. The first one is about social cohesion and harmony. And how do we build that? And so a couple of examples that I wanted to give from the Prophet ﷺ's life. The very first and important principle about building community is about being easygoing with one another. And I know this sounds really, really easy, but it's probably one of the biggest impediments in MSAs, in masajid, and in any organizations, whether it be corporate or otherwise. And what I mean by this is that oftentimes people, at least let's take an MSA as an example. Sometimes MSAs have a reputation for being very rigid, or members as being very harsh, that they have this very, very well-defined way of operating, and that they don't really tolerate any dissent, and they're actually very cold and cliquish. And so once that occurs, it's going to be an impediment for any sort of larger success. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as Allah said in the Quran, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. From the mercy of Allah was that the Prophet ﷺ was easygoing with the people. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. Had he been harsh and hard-hearted, everyone would have dispersed from around him. فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. So what do you need to do? So forgive them, be easygoing with them, and always consult them in the affairs that you partake in. Now this is actually, I think this verse is very powerful, because it was actually revealed at a time when the collective decision was the wrong decision. And I think that's another big premise that I want to drive into our minds, is that sometimes we think as individuals, if we're MSA presidents or active members of any organization, that we know best. And you might actually know better than someone else, that's part of your organization. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the Battle of Hajj, he made consultation with everybody. He said, okay, what should we do? Should we go outside and fight, or should we let the enemy come into the city and fight? And so the senior companions, who are older and wiser, are like, look, Medina is a fortified city. Let's fight within the confines of our city, because we know our city better. And the young companions, and youngsters as they usually are, very energetic, very passionate, like, no, let's go out and we'll be strong. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he was swayed by them, and they were really passionate. Okay, let's go out and let's meet them outside. And they went outside, and it actually led to a loss. So Allah is telling the Prophet, even when you make mutual consultation with one another, there'll be times where mistakes are made, but you still need to work together. So it's not actually about the end result, but it's about the process. Because the long-term success will depend on that. So this principle, though, of being easygoing, it needs to be understood through some examples. So the first thing, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is one example. Here he is in the masjid in Medina, and the Sahaba are there and they're praying. And the masjid, of course, is the most pure place that's supposed to be in the Muslim community. And here, all of a sudden, you have one day, a Bedouin walks in from the middle of the desert, pulls down his pants, and he goes number one in the corner of the masjid. Right? Maybe you've heard this hadith before. Right? Most of you, right? So, what does the Sahaba want to do? They want to jump him. Come on, peeing in the masjid, right? And they got really upset and they're ready to jump him pretty much. The Prophet said, take it easy. He said, let him finish, and when he's done, he'll take a bucket of water and you throw it on. Right? And so then the Prophet went to the man, right? And he spoke to him very, very gently. All right? And then the man, of course, he said that, my mother and my father, I'd sacrifice them for the Prophet Muhammad. He never scolded me, or he never cursed me. Right? Now, I want to take this simple example, which we've heard, but just translate it into real life. Right? I remember when I was the imam in the masjid one time, right? All the time you have newcomers who come, new converts in particular. And so, if you get a new convert who comes, right, you may not know the adab of the masjid. Right? And so, simple rules, like maybe not stepping over someone who's praying, right, or standing in front of someone who's praying. Right? So I remember this convert, he's walking through the musalla, he wanted to come to the front to talk to me, right? And then all of a sudden, a couple of uncles, they see him, they're just like shooting at him. And brother, don't you know anything about the masjid? Right? You're not supposed to step over people's back. And they just went off on him, right? Now what does that do to the individual's feeling of belonging? We have an innate desire to belong. Right? Most of you wouldn't be here if it was just like you come by yourself and there's no one else with you. If it was like a virtual conference. Imagine every speaker was speaking from their computer somewhere, right? And you just came here and you could just watch that person via Skype. Would you want to come? Would you drive all the way down from Davis or from Berkeley or from LA just as an individual? No. You came because there's a sense of belonging. You came because of the brotherhood. You came because of the sisterhood. You came because of something greater. And so the Prophet, he understood this. And any time you do something that undermines someone's ability to belong, you jeopardize the social success of the Ummah. Another example. There was a man, he came to the masjid and he's praying. Middle of the salah, somebody sneezes in the salah. And so this man, he's standing here and he's praying. He says, Yarhamukumullah, in the middle of the salah. And so the companions, right, they're all praying and they give this guy, imagine in the middle of the salah, they give him a dirty look, like, what are you doing, right? And so the man in the prayer, he's like, he thinks he did something good. He's like, literally, if I translate, he's like, what the hell are you looking at? Right? In salah, right? They go, well, and then the companions, now he's talking. Then they started like shut up, like they're slapping their legs on the side, as the hadith said. And the man said, I was so angry, but then I kept my mouth shut till the prayer ended. Right? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ turned around and he said that in the salah, right, speech of man is not something which would, the speech of man is not part of the salah, it's only tasbih and tahmeed and dhikr, right? And so, another example here, and then the guy said the same thing, may Allah, bless the Prophet, he did not scold me, he did not, ostracize me or any of these things. Right? So, a third example, and I think this is the funniest that I think the whole seerah of how the Prophet was so easygoing, and the rigidity that we often have that is not found in his life. Right? There's a man, he came to the Prophet Muhammad and said, Ya Rasulullah, I'm ruined. Like, I'm screwed. The Prophet's like, what happened? He's like, I had relations with my wife, during my fast of Ramadan. Right? So he broke his fast. And that's a huge sin, and there's a huge expiation. So the Prophet tells him, okay, you need to free a slave. Right? He's like, I'm broke, I don't have any money. So you need to fast for 2 consecutive months. Because I couldn't last one day, you want me to fast 2 months? Right? He's like, okay, you need to feed 64 people. He's like, I don't have any money. So the Prophet said, okay, fine. Shortly later, someone came and brought a whole bunch of food. Right? And the Prophet said, okay, take this food and give it to the poor people now. He's like, people who are not in my family? The Prophet's like, yeah. He's like, I have the brokest family in all of Medina. He's okay, fine, you take this and you and your family will enjoy it, right? I mean, look at this story. Right? Here's a man, he did a sin, right? He broke his fast in the month of Ramadan. Alright? He comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ, just very, very gentle and relaxed, right? Very easy. That's why he told Aisha, he said, Aisha alayka bil rifq, right? He said that I command you, right, to always be gentle, because gentleness, it doesn't touch anything except that it beautifies it, and don't be harsh, because once that gentleness is removed, then it only disgraces that act, right? So this is really the first principle. That just think about it in every aspect of your life. Don't just think about it in Islamic context. And think about it when you go on into your careers, right, and your internships and your other clubs that you're a part of. When you have that gentle personality, and that no one has to worry, If I say the wrong thing, this person's going to start to lash out. If I make a mistake, this person's going to punish me. All right? Then you're going to find yourself really succeeding in all of your endeavors, and the group will collectively succeed. This is why Allah says in the Quran that don't argue, or else Allah will take your wind away. He said, right? Because once you begin to get into conflict, right, all the energy you build up, right, it disappears. The second thing, and actually I'll stop for a minute because I'll ask if there's any questions or comments. I don't like to talk too much. We're not breaking. Comments or questions? Practical things maybe that you guys are dealing with? Yeah?
What question I have, what if a person like is still for shady stuff,
Okay?
like cheating at night,
Okay?
and what do you do with that from a judgment perspective?
From a what perspective?
Judgment.
From a gentle perspective? So if someone is doing shady things, within the group that you're working with, the first thing is try not to call that person out in public. Right? Whenever someone does something wrong, you try to approach them in private. Right? Say, look, I know what's going on, right? And let's try our best and try to communicate with that person and give them advice in private. If the person doesn't respond in private, after you've given them the private advice and the harm is actually going to be public, at that point, it is okay to call the person out. So I'll give you an example, right? In the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? There was a Sahabi. His name was Hatib ibn Balta, right? And this companion, when the Battle of Badr was taking place, right? One of the battles was taking place. He had some family members back in the city of Mecca who were not Muslim, and he wanted to protect their interest. So he wrote a letter, right? And he sent it to warn them. And he was a Muslim, right? This is after Badr, right? And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, it was a revelation that the Sahabi is spilling a secret, and he actually called him out on it, right? But of course, he had said that the sins of the people of Badr are forgiven, but it wasn't something to be forgiven, taken lightly, because it had social ramifications. So if the matter has social ramifications, you can out somebody. I'll give you another example. When I was an imam in the community, there was a brother, he used to cheat everybody in immigration. Right? He pretended to be a lawyer, and he would take all sorts of money from people who were in a bad legal situation. And so all of a sudden I'm hearing somebody comes in that says, this brother jacked 5 grand for me, 10 grand for me, 15 grand for me. So I pulled this brother into the office. I said, look, I hear one more story. I get on the minbar and I tell everyone that you're the biggest crook and you're never allowed to come back to this community, right? And alhamdulillah, nothing happened after that, because some people have to be held accountable for things, right? Other questions? No? Yeah?
I like how you mentioned that you don't have people that are going to see, because one of the best ways to go for us is to be able to take people out and see their perspective, and hopefully we try to work.
Yeah, exactly. I think the best example of that is, again, the story of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? A young man, he comes, again, this is the gentleness, right? Imagine a 16-year-old Sahabi, right? He comes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all the companions are sitting around. And he's like, think about any average 16-year-old in society, what's happening to them, in terms of their identity, right? In terms of their hormones. And he's like, Ya Rasulullah, let me sleep with a girl. Right? And man, this is what he said openly in front of the companions. Right? Just let me have sex with a girl, right? And the Sahaba are taken aback. Well, and Umar was like, let me just slap this guy in the face, right? He'll come and ask the Prophet, can I go and have relationships with a woman? And he's not married. He's obviously talking out of wedlock. And so the Prophet told him, do you have a mom? Right? You guys don't even know the hadith, right? He said, do you have a mom? He said, yeah. Well, some people don't like it that someone would do that to their mother, right? Do you have a sister? He said, yeah. Because other people have sisters, and people wouldn't like it if someone did that to their sister. And he went on and on. You have an aunt, a maternal aunt, a paternal aunt. And finally, the guy, he thought about it, the young teenager. He's like, you know what? If I'm gonna, have a relationship with the girl out of wedlock, right? That's somebody's daughter, right? That's somebody's sister. That's somebody's relative, right? That's a real person. And then he told the Prophet, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? It's a very different approach towards. Imagine someone came today to a Shaykh for the most part and said, yeah, Shaykh, let me have a girlfriend, let me have a relationship with her, or a boyfriend. Astaghfirullah, haram, you'll go to hell if you do that, right? And that's, it's right, it is haram, right? But what is the personality and what is the attitude? How are you winning people's hearts over? Now, if you go to a Shaykh or anybody and you ask them a question, and the answer you get is, astaghfirullah, haram, are you going to go back and ask them another question in the future? Right? No, you're not going to. But if someone is talking to you through the issue, right, helping you understand it, thinking about it from a different perspective, well, now when you have a problem, you're going to go back over and over and over. Now the doors of communication have become open. And that's what Prophet Muhammad was all about doing. Just again, same thing, right? Someone came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a woman, right? And she's asking about a wet dream. And Aisha, the Prophet's wife, Salama, right, she got very, very shy. Another woman is coming and asking the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam about wet dreams. Now, how could people do that? It's because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so easygoing with them. And then he was that approachable. Right? That approachable. Right? They used to say that any kid, in the city of Medina, when they wanted to get the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they could just go, grab his hand, and walk around the city and do whatever they wanted to do with it. So try to inculcate that in yourself. A disposition that anyone feels comfortable speaking to you, anyone feels comfortable approaching you, expressing their emotions or their feelings or whatever's happening. The second thing I want to speak about, and then I'll leave a lot of time for Q&A. What time do we have today? 10 minutes? Okay. Is the only way that we can have success as a community is by encouraging creativity. And this is a huge part of the sunnah that is forgotten. Oftentimes we are told that things are very regimented in Islam, that there is a predefined sunnah, and like you can't do anything other than like these well-defined acts. And Allah says in the Quran that He brought you out of your mother's stomachs without knowing anything. Then He says, وَجَعَلَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. Or لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. So Allah brought you out of your mother's wombs, and you didn't know anything. Then He gave you the ability to see, to hear, and to reflect, so that you would give thanks. So the scholars have written a lot on this verse and other ideas that one of the biggest catastrophes in the Muslim Ummah today is the notion that being creative is like a crime. It's almost like criminal, and it's looked down upon to be creative and to be unique in your talents. And this is essential. If you're going to be easygoing and give people their space, that's where ingenuity comes out of, right? That's where all these solutions come out of. Right? When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the city of Medina, right, and he wanted to have a call for adhan, right? What did he do? He asked the companions, "What do you guys think we should do?" Someone said, let's ring a bell. No, that's not a good idea that Christians do that. Right? Let's blow a horn. Other Jews, they also blow a horn. Let's light a fire, right? Everyone can see the fire at the time of Salah. That's not a good idea. Finally, someone came and said, "You know what? I had this dream, right? And this beautiful, and he told me adhan." He's like, "That's great, right?" The Prophet allowed people to express the best way to do something. Right? Another companion, right? Salman al-Farisi, right? I mentioned it yesterday in the talk, in the Battle of Khandaq, right? In the middle of a war. And the companion comes and he says, "Ya Rasulullah, can I give you some advice? I have a suggestion on how we should go about this battle. Where I come from, we dig ditches." The Prophet said, "That's a great idea." Battle of Badr, same thing. Another companion, he came to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Look, where you have placed your army, imagine like here." Right? And he goes, "Have you done this out of revelation?" He's like, "No, this is military opinion." He's like, "I have a suggestion. Why don't we move the army forward to block off the wells so that the enemy can't get access to the water?" The Prophet said, "It's a great idea, right?" You have so many examples like this. One time it was people in the masjid waiting for salah, and this man is reciting, Alhamdulillah kathira, subhanallah bukratan wa asila. Where does that come from? Who remembers that? Eid takbir, right? So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after salah, he says, "Who was making that dua?" And then one of the men, he said, "Yeah, it was me." He goes, "That was an amazing dua," right? He goes, the doors of the heavens opened when we heard that dua, right? He's encouraging the companion. You can be creative. You can make up your own dua, right? You can use your talents to serve this ummah in different ways. And if the Muslim ummah realizes this, right, it will get back to a position. I think one of the biggest troubles we have as Muslims is that it's very hard to find something that is halal, fun, and fun at the same time. Right? If you think about it. If I said, "Hey, let's go have some halal fun," right? Like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, only thing that people do for fun is like things that they're kind of like, I probably shouldn't be doing it at the time, right? Because, and if you think about like books, is there a good like Islamic fiction book anyone has ever read? Right? Has anyone ever been to like a play or like a movie that had like a good like Islamic theme, right? Yeah. What do you think?
It's Theory of Country.
Which one?
Lollywood.
What?
Yeah.
A Lollywood? Is that after Halloween? But you get the idea, like this notion that, and the Sahaba used to do this. The Sahaba used to get together in the masjid, and they used to recite poetry, right? They used to do all these different things. There was opportunities for people to express their creative talents, and the Muslim Ummah to be served by that, right? If you think about it today, if a Muslim wants to go into film, Again, what do you get? Haram, right? Haram, right? If a Muslim wants to go into any sort of arts, right? These are all fields that are generally have been closed because of this fear that we're going to do something which is not halal. Now, of course, you should be careful. I'm not trying to open the floodgates and say everything is halal. Right? There needs to be guidance. There needs to be a sunnah that is being followed. Right? But my entire point is that there is flexibility, and this is part of social development. Now, if you take like a startup, right? Startups work under what notion? They work under, we have creative talents. I trust your talents. Let's build something together. And they give people time to work on these projects by themselves. Right? So I want each of you to think about that in your own lives. If you're trying to build something of substance, how do you do it? You have to be easy with going with one another, allow for each other to make mistakes, and also allow for each other's creativity to flourish. It's extremely important. Umar bin Khattab, same thing, right? He goes in the masjid, right? In Ramadan, he sees it's a mess. There's a guy praying here with his friends, a guy praying here with his friends, 10 people praying by themselves over there. You know what? Let's bring everybody together, right? And he organized Tarawih. That was a creative endeavor of Umar bin Khattab, right? So these are the type of things that the Sahaba had done, right? So I only have 5 minutes, so I want to kind of slowly wrap this up. The main point of this talk, right, it was twofold, right? That yes, our individual success matters, but the individual success is really just a way to achieve communal success. And we don't only focus on ourselves, but we focus on doing things that better the entire community around us. And that can only be done through certain ways of interacting with one another. The first of them is to be extremely easygoing and flexible with one another. Number two is to allow and to encourage creativity amongst one another. And I think if we do this, I mean, if we had 10 ideas and 8 of them failed, right? You'd have 2 still good ideas that come out of it. But if you close the door to any possible idea that comes up, right, nothing's actually going to happen. Excuse me. So I'll end with that. So we have about 3-4 minutes for Q&A, and then inshallah you can wrap it up. Go ahead.
I had just two questions. One actually clarification. What was the principle to attracting
Which is to allow for creativity. Yeah.
And now I was thinking on the and I guess this whole striking a balance between creativity and egoism. And you mentioned also the educational psychology. So I wanted to take your thoughts on, I guess, the balance between two and education. You have sort of the formal classroom environment where that you have to prepare for teaching.
Yeah.
And I guess like what do you know about, I guess what's, I know this is obviously I hear about like an ongoing I guess topic research, but like what is kind of like a successful classroom environment? Or what kind of balance kind of
Great question. So a horrible classroom environment is what you're exposed to every day in the university. Okay? So the typical lecture, which is actually, I don't like this format to be honest. I don't think it's conducive for learning. But it's at least, hopefully, it can just put some main ideas in your head. Right? So that question I'll really briefly answer. We have to get back to thinking about what is the objective of a learning environment, right? Whether it be a classroom, whether it be a conference, whether it be a youth group, you name it. What is the purpose of that gathering? I think we confuse oftentimes, at least in the Western approach to education, everything is about content, right? It's about content. Now, if I was to give you guys a test on like what Imam Zaid said earlier today, what I spoke about last night, or Shaykh Ahmad, or Shaykh Jamal, or Linda, how many of you would really remember like the details of any of those talks? You will not, right? It's a lot of information, right? But does that mean that does it mean that it was a waste of your time? No. It's what is the objective and the goal. My personal opinion as someone who studies educational psychology is that our goal should be that the learning environment should facilitate interest in the subject. So let's just say from today, you can forget everything I said. All you need to remember is be easygoing and be creative. Right? Now, if you can take that and say, you know what, I don't remember what he said, I don't remember any of the examples, right? But now I just have this idea in my mind. And that's going to motivate me to go and to try something in my life. You know what, I'm a writer, I want to go and write something. Right? I'm waiting for someone to write, some amazing novels from like an Islamic perspective, right? Or someone to write a play, or someone to put together a movie, or something, whatever, it makes no difference. Create an app, right? That is the objective, that there's something, it's not about just information, right? There's something greater that the learning environment is supposed to achieve, which hopefully is sustained interest. That beyond the classroom setting, you would go and pursue studying that subject by yourself. So that's my opinion on what education should be. Wallahu a'lam. About a minute, right? Yeah. So pretty much, when we talk about this notion of what is an Islamic idea, right? An Islamic idea is any idea that is in line with Islamic principle, right? It could be Western, it can be Eastern, it really makes no difference, right? So I'll give you a simple example. Look at Islamic architecture, right? If you travel all over the world, you'll see different Islamic architecture in every Muslim country. The masjid in China doesn't look like the masjid in Egypt, right? Doesn't look like the masjid in Pakistan. Are any of them more Islamic than the other? No, it's not. As long as there's no violation of some clear Islamic principles, then that is something which is acceptable under the Islamic tradition. And so I think we need to think about that deeply. That when we're here as American Muslims, are we trying to import Arab Islam here? And when I say that, I'm not saying Arab Islam is bad. What I'm saying is that is the Islam that's practiced is infused with the culture that surrounds it. That includes the language, the architecture, the way the discourse, the speaking, so on and so forth, right? If it's Chinese, right? Now, if I came and I built a masjid here, and it had a total, looked like a Chinese temple, most Muslims probably would get upset, right? So I said, well, you know in China the masjids look like this, right? But so it's like we need to understand, what are we trying to establish? So I think here, as American Muslims, there needs to be, and this goes back to I should have mentioned it more in my talk, that the authenticity of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what really made him someone people trust is that he was of them and like them. So the examples that he would speak in language, the way that he would behave, the way he would walk, his cultural experiences were shared with his people. So if we do things here that are extremely foreign all the time, then don't expect people to connect to those things. The sense of belonging will not be there, right? Like I'll give you an example. When I walk into a place, right, and everyone is speaking a different language, that's tough for me to feel like I belong, even if I speak that language, to be honest. Like I speak Arabic, right? If I go into a gathering and everyone's speaking Arabic, I'm at the end of the day, I'm American, right? My first language is English. I was born and raised, speaking English. I can speak Urdu and Arabic. But if I go into a gathering and speaking Urdu, it's like I can understand them, but it's not me. Speaking Arabic, it's not me. So we just need to really get at that notion of creativity needs to also reflect the culture of the people. And that's the best way moving forward, right? So, Allah. Out of time? All right, so I think we're out of time, but if people want, I can stay for questions as long as they did. We ask Allah to give us success both on the inside and, of course, at the societal level. We ask Allah to make us easy going with one another. We ask Allah to give us creative minds in our ummah. We ask Allah to give us success. Assalamu alaikum wa
Jazakallah khair, Ustaz Osman. Before you all run, just a couple announcements. You can pick up program booklets if you haven't already at registration table. What next is our workshops, so there should be ushers to go to the specific rooms for the workshops that you're interested in, so find the usher and follow them to the distinctive rooms. And I think that's about it. Okay, Jazakallah khair everyone. So workshops are next.
If anyone needs to know, in general, where to go, you ask me. So.
Also download the app. It's very helpful. Keeps you up to date.
The app has a map. It has everything on there. Okay?
Thank you. I'll go next week. Hey, yeah. Hello, we did the guys.
I was like,
perhaps